Daniel Raines had it all. Money, fame, charm, the kind of man whose name alone could open doors, bend rules, and silence rooms. At just 32, he had already built a tech empire worth billions. His face was plastered across magazines, and his dating history was a tabloid's dream. Models, actresses, influencers each more glamorous than the last. But to Daniel, none of it really mattered. Not the parties, not the penthouses, not even the women. It was all too easy, predictable, boring. So when his best friend and business partner Trent leaned across the VIP lounge table one night with a smug grin and a glass of scotch in hand, Daniel didn't expect what came next. "I bet you wouldn't last 3 months married to someone who doesn't fit your perfect image," Trent challenged. Daniel raised an eyebrow, amused. "What are you getting at?" "I'm talking about a real woman, Daniel. Not someone polished for the camera, not someone who cares about likes and angles. I mean someone different." Daniel leaned back, the corner of his mouth twitching. "Different how?" Trent smirked, pulling out his phone and scrolling until he found the photo. "Her name's Olivia. She works at the bookstore down on Elm. She's kind, quiet, and overweight." Daniel studied the photo. Olivia was seated behind a counter, reading a worn-out paperback, unaware of the camera. She was undeniably overweight, dressed in oversized clothes, her hair tied back in a loose bun. But there was something about her, something raw, unfiltered, and deeply human. "You're serious?" Daniel asked, incredulous. "Dead serious. Marry her. Date her for real, win her trust, then marry her. If you can keep the act up for 3 months, I'll give up my shares in the company. But if you bail or she finds out, it's all mine." Daniel stared at the glass in his hand, the flickering lights of the rooftop reflecting in the amber liquid. It was insane, ridiculous, but also tempting. "You think I can't do it?" he asked. "I think you won't. You're too used to women who chase after your lifestyle. You wouldn't survive 1 week in a relationship that doesn't boost your ego." Daniel's lips curled into a slow grin. He leaned forward, clinking his glass with Trent's. "You're on." The next morning, Daniel walked into that tiny bookstore on Elm Street. The bell above the door chimed softly, and the faint scent of old paper filled the air. Olivia looked up from the counter, her eyes widening for just a second before returning to her book. He approached with a rehearsed smile. "Hey, I'm looking for something to read. Got any recommendations?" She raised an eyebrow, unconvinced. "You don't look like someone who reads much." Daniel chuckled. "You caught me, but I'm trying to change that." Olivia's lips twitched, almost a smile. She stood up, walking toward the fiction section. "Come on then. Let's find something that won't put you to sleep." And just like that, it began. What started as a reckless bet made in the haze of a drunken night quickly spiraled into something Daniel hadn't expected. Olivia was nothing like the women he'd known. She was sharp, brutally honest, and completely uninterested in his money or reputation. She didn't wear makeup, she didn't care about social media, and she certainly didn't fall for cheap compliments. Daniel found himself returning to the bookstore daily, inventing reasons just to see her. He bought books he never read, asked questions he already knew the answers to, anything to keep the conversation going. Slowly, he chipped away at her walls, learning that Olivia had dreams of becoming a writer, that she took care of her sick mother, and that she'd spent most of her life being overlooked, underestimated, ignored. But Daniel didn't care, because for the first time in a long time, someone was seeing him, not the billionaire, not the icon, but just a man. And it terrified him. The days turned into weeks, and Daniel kept showing up. At first, Olivia remained cautious. She didn't trust men easily, especially ones who looked like they walked out of a fashion magazine and spoke with the charm of a professional liar. She had met men like him before. They came with flashy words and false promises, always leaving her feeling like less. But Daniel was different, or at least, he seemed to be. He listened, really listened. He laughed at her sarcastic jokes, asked about her writing, remembered small things like the fact she hated pineapple on pizza and loved thunderstorms. He even brought her tea one rainy afternoon and sat on the floor of the bookstore with her, just reading in silence. For a moment, Olivia let her guard down, just a little. Daniel, meanwhile, was struggling to remember where the act ended and where the truth began. What started as manipulation was slowly becoming fascination. He found himself thinking about Olivia at night. He stopped attending parties. His phone buzzed with messages from models and influencers, but he ignored them all. None of them mattered. Only she did. One night, after closing time, Olivia was cleaning up when Daniel showed up again, this time with 2 bags of takeout. "I thought you might be hungry," he said, holding up the food like a peace offering. She hesitated. "I already ate." "Good thing I didn't believe you," he smiled, stepping inside. They sat behind the counter, eating Thai food out of paper containers. It was simple, quiet, real. Daniel couldn't remember the last time he'd shared a meal that wasn't under the spotlight of a 5-star restaurant. "Why do you keep coming here?" Olivia finally asked, her tone soft but serious. Daniel took a breath. This was the moment. The moment he should say something clever. Something that would keep the illusion alive. But what came out was unexpected, even to him. "Because being here feels like I can breathe. And being with you feels honest." Olivia looked at him, unsure of what to say. She wasn't used to hearing things like that, especially not from men like him. "I'm not who you think I am, Daniel," she said quietly. "I'm not polished. I'm not pretty. I'm not the type of girl men like you fall for." He looked at her, eyes sincere. "Maybe I've been chasing the wrong type all along." Her breath caught in her throat. From that night forward, something shifted between them. Daniel wasn't just a customer anymore. He helped her restock shelves. He stayed late while she worked on her manuscript. They shared music, movies, and stories about the scars they both carried, the ones no one else ever saw. And for the first time in years, Olivia felt seen. But Daniel knew something she didn't. The clock was ticking. The deal he had made with Trent was nearing its deadline. He had convinced Olivia to go on dates. He had made her laugh, made her feel wanted. The final step was marriage. It was the only way to win the bétend, the fortune that came with it. But the thought of using her now made him feel sick. How had everything spiraled into this? He had been so sure in the beginning, so sure it was just a game, just another story to laugh about over expensive wine. But now Olivia had become the one thing Daniel never planned for: real. One night, as they sat together on the rooftop of her apartment building, watching the stars, Olivia rested her head on Daniel's shoulder. "I haven't felt this at peace in years," she whispered. Daniel's heart twisted. He wanted to tell her everything, but fear silenced him. Instead, he held her hand tighter. He didn't know how much longer he could keep the truth buried, but he knew one thing for certain. If she ever found out, it would destroy her. And worse, it would destroy him too. It was Olivia who brought it up first. They were sitting in the small garden behind the bookstore, her hands wrapped around a warm mug of coffee, when she said it casually, almost like a joke. "Wouldn't it be crazy," she said with a half laugh, "if we just got married someday? Like 2 misfits beating the odds?" Daniel froze. Not because he didn't want it, but because it had started that way. As a lie, and now it was the one thing he wanted most. He forced a smile. "Yeah, crazy." But the seed was planted. A week later, they were walking through a flea market when Olivia stopped in front of a table of antique rings. She picked one up delicate, with a sapphire stone and a faded silver band. "This one's beautiful," she whispered. Daniel bought it without saying a word. 2 days later, he proposed. There was no fancy dinner, no fireworks, just him and her, standing in the back of the bookstore after closing, the ring in his palm and a storm of guilt in his chest. "Olivia," he said, voice trembling, "will you marry me?" She stared at him, stunned, her eyes filled with tears, and then slowly she nodded. "Yes," she said. "Yes." And just like that, Daniel Lewis, billionaire heir and shameless manipulator, had crossed a line he could never undo. The wedding was quiet, intimate. Just a few friends from Olivia's world, a couple of people Daniel barely knew, and Stephanie, only one who knew the truth. She stood in the back, watching with unease. Because she knew what this was. A game that had become a nightmare. A wedding that had begun with a bet. And the woman at the center of it all was falling deeper with every smile. Daniel, in his tuxedo, couldn't stop looking at her. Olivia wore a second-hand dress she had altered herself. It wasn't perfect. The lace was slightly uneven, the hem a little too short. But to Daniel, she looked like something out of a dream. He whispered his vows with shaking hands. And when Olivia said hers, he nearly broke. Because she believed in every word. She believed him. And he didn't deserve it. At the reception, a local band played soft jazz in the corner of a small courtyard. The bookstore was lit with fairy lights. Olivia danced barefoot under the stars, laughing, alive in a way Daniel had never seen before. He watched her, aching with a guilt that refused to leave him. Stephanie approached him quietly. "You need to tell her, Daniel. You can't keep this going." He shook his head. "Not tonight. I can't ruin this for her. Not yet." She stared at him. "If you wait too long, it won't be just a betrayal. It'll destroy her." Daniel knew she was right. But he was a coward. That night, in the apartment they now shared, Olivia curled up next to him in bed. "I never thought I'd be this happy," she said, tracing her fingers across his chest. "It feels like I finally found home." Daniel said nothing, because if he opened his mouth, everything would come crashing down. But the truth was no longer a shadow he could outrun. It was a storm building on the horizon. And when it hit, it would tear everything apart. It started with whispers. Not from Olivia, not yet. But from the world Daniel had tried so hard to keep at bay. A photo surfaced online, a blurry image of Daniel at the wedding, standing next to Olivia, laughing, holding her hand. At first, it didn't get much attention. Just a few comments, a couple of retweets. But the internet never sleeps. And it never forgets. Within hours, the headlines began to form. Billionaire Daniel Lewis marries mystery woman. Who is she? Is this a real love story or a PR stunt? From rags to riches, the woman who captured the heart of a billionaire. Daniel's phone exploded with messages. Journalists, influencers, paparazzi, and worse, his friends. The same ones who had made the cruel bet in the first place. They reached out, half laughing, half shocked. "Wait, you actually married her? No way, man. Tell me this is still part of the game. Bro, you're a legend. Or a lunatic." Daniel blocked them all. But the guilt clawed deeper. Stephanie tried to manage the fallout. She contacted PR agents, tried to scrub the story before it became national. But it was too late. The machine had already started. And Olivia noticed. Not at first. But gradually, she saw the way people looked at her differently when they walked through the streets. The way customers in the bookstore whispered when she passed. One evening, she confronted Daniel. "Why is the media talking about us?" she asked, holding her phone up, shaking slightly. "Why are people saying I trapped you? That I'm some social climber?" Daniel tried to lie. "They don't know anything. It's just noise." But his voice cracked, and Olivia saw it. That flicker of something, guilt, fear, hesitation. She let it go, for the moment. But the seed of doubt had been planted. That night, Olivia sat alone in the living room, scrolling through the articles. Each one felt like a blade. They dissected her appearance, mocked her weight, compared her to Daniel's ex's models, actresses, women with perfect smiles and empty eyes. She felt like she was being erased, reduced to a headline, a joke, a prop in someone else's narrative. And Daniel, he watched from the doorway, unable to move. He wanted to tell her, to confess everything. But every time he opened his mouth, he saw her eyes, trusting, soft, full of love. And he stayed silent. But the past was no longer sleeping. One morning, Olivia received an anonymous envelope in the mail. Inside were screenshots, messages. The original bet? A copy of the group chat Daniel had once laughed in back when she was nothing more than a challenge to conquer. At first, she didn't believe it. She stared at the printouts for hours, hands trembling. Her heart raced. Her chest tightened. "No," she whispered. "It's fake. It has to be." But deep down, she knew. The words were too specific, the jokes too cruel, the timing too perfect. She looked at the man she had married, the one who had held her in the night, who had whispered that she was his everything, and suddenly, none of it felt real. Her world shattered. When Daniel came home that evening, the apartment was dark. She was waiting for him, sitting on the edge of the bed with the envelope in her lap. He saw her face and knew instantly. It was over. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She just looked at him, eyes hollow, voice cold. "Tell me it's not true." Daniel stood frozen in the doorway. "Olivia, tell me I wasn't part of some disgusting game." He took a step forward, then stopped. "I didn't mean for it to happen like that. I didn't know I'd fall in love with you." She laughed, bitter and broken. "You fell in love? Is that what you call it? Using me to win a bet?" "No, Olivia. It started like that, yes. But everything after, it was real." She stood up, shaking, holding the envelope between them. "This is how it started, Daniel. And no matter what you say, I will never forget it." He reached for her, but she stepped back. "I don't want apologies," she said. "I want the truth. I want to know who I married." He opened his mouth, but there was nothing left to say. She walked past him without another word. And just like that, the fairy tale burned to ash. Olivia disappeared. Not into some dramatic storm or runaway night, but into silence. She packed a small suitcase, left the penthouse before dawn, and vanished into the city she thought she had left behind forever. The doorman said she looked calm, controlled. But her eyes were empty. Daniel searched everywhere. He called hospitals, old friends, shelters. He checked their favorite bookstore, the cafe where they'd first kissed, the garden where she had once laughed under a fountain of light. She was nowhere. His mansion echoed with absence. The rooms once filled with soft music and warmth now felt like tombs. He wandered through them like a ghost, haunted by the life he destroyed with one selfish lie. Stephanie was the only one who dared speak the truth. "You loved her," she said plainly. Daniel didn't respond. "You had everything," she added, "but you couldn't be honest with the one person who deserved it the most." "I didn't mean for it to go this far," Daniel whispered, his voice cracking. "But it did," she said. "And now you have to ask yourself, what are you willing to lose to make it right?" The media, of course, pounced on the scandal. Billionaire's marriage was all a bet. From groom to grim, the ugly truth behind Daniel Lewis's wedding. Olivia Davis betrayed heartbreak in high society. The headlines were ruthless. Olivia's face was plastered on every screen. Her old high school pictures, paparazzi shots of her leaving their apartment. They dissected every part of her life, as if she were a character in a cruel play. Daniel watched it all unfold. And for the first time in his life, he didn't care about the stocks or the boardrooms or the empire. He cared about her. Somewhere in a small rented room on the city's edge, Olivia sat curled up on a second-hand mattress, watching the same news. She saw the clips, read the articles. But what broke her wasn't the betrayal, it was the memory of who Daniel had become. The man who brought her tea when she was sick, the man who danced with her barefoot in the kitchen, the man who, in moments of stillness, held her like she was the only real thing in his life. She hated him for lying, but she hated herself more for missing him. Weeks passed. The world moved on, as it always does. But Daniel didn't. He stopped attending meetings. He skipped investor calls. He withdrew from every event and appearance. Instead, he wrote. Every day, he sat at the same desk where Olivia once left him love notes and poured his heart into letters she might never read. Not grand declarations, just truths. His fears. his regrets, his love. He left them with Stephanie, who mailed one each week, never knowing if they reached her hands. Until one did. Late one night, Olivia sat by a foggy window, holding one of his letters in shaking fingers. It wasn't poetic. It wasn't clever. It was broken. I was a coward, Olivia. I used you, then fell for you, then tried to pretend the beginning didn't matter. But it does, because that's where I failed you. I was scared you'd never love me if you knew the truth, but I should have trusted that what we had was real. I would trade every dollar I own just to hear you laugh again. Even if you never forgive me, please know this. I never stopped loving you. She read it again, and again, and for the first time in weeks, she cried. Real tears, not of pain or shame or anger, but of something she thought had died hope. The next day, she didn't return his call, or the next one. But she didn't throw away the letters either. She read each one, every night, one after the other. They became her lullabies. And slowly, piece by piece, the wall she had built began to crack. Daniel, unaware, kept writing, not because he thought it would win her back, but because he couldn't stop loving her. Then, one evening, as the first snow began to fall outside his window, Daniel found a small envelope on the floor of his lobby. No stamp, no return address, just his name, handwritten in soft ink. Inside, a single note. Meet me where it all started. His heart stopped. He didn't sleep that night. And before the sun had risen, he was already standing outside the old bookstore where she used to work, where the entire lie had begun. He didn't know if she'd come, but he stood there hat in hand, coat pulled tight, waiting. And then, through the glass, he saw her, standing near the shelves, wearing that same navy scarf he once teased her about, her eyes locked with his. And in that moment, time didn't just stop. It forgave. The bell above the bookstore door jingled softly as Daniel stepped inside. His shoes felt heavier than usual, his coat damp with snow, but his heart, it was racing like a man chasing his last chance. Olivia stood near the poetry section, her back to him. She didn't move when he entered. She simply stared at the spine of a book she wasn't reading, waiting. Daniel approached slowly, each step deliberate. When he stopped beside her, she finally turned her head, their eyes meeting. There was no anger in her gaze, no coldness, just something deeper, an ocean of hurt, mixed with the faint shimmer of what once was. I wasn't sure you'd come, he said quietly. I wasn't sure I would either, she replied. A pause. Then Olivia spoke again, her voice steady but soft. Why did you do it, Daniel? Why make the bet? Why choose me for something so cruel? He swallowed hard. I didn't choose you for the bet, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I chose you because you were the one person in that cafe who looked at me like I was human. Olivia looked away, her throat tightening. I was drunk, angry, and stupid. The bet was a way to prove I was still in control of my life, that I could take anything and turn it into gold. He paused. But you were never part of that. Not really. You were something else entirely. Olivia's hands trembled. She clenched the book a little tighter. You lied to me every day, she said. You made me believe in something. You made me feel something, and it was never real. It was real, he interrupted gently. At least it became real. I never expected to fall in love with you. I didn't even know I was capable of it. Tears welled in her eyes, but she blinked them away. You don't get to rewrite what happened, Daniel. Just because your feelings changed doesn't mean you get to undo the damage. I'm not trying to erase it, he said, stepping closer. I'm trying to own it. Every awful, shameful part of it. Olivia finally turned to face him fully. You broke me. I know, he said, voice cracking. I stopped trusting myself. I started looking in the mirror and seeing a joke. A woman who believed a fairy tale because a rich man smiled at her. You were never a joke, Daniel said fiercely. You were the only truth I've ever known. Silence. Outside, Snow continued to fall, muffling the city's chaos, creating a pocket of stillness around them. Then, Olivia reached into her coat pocket and pulled out one of his letters, the first one she had received. She held it between them. "I read every word," she whispered. "I hated you when I opened this, but I cried by the time I finished." Daniel took a breath, unsure whether to speak. "I thought I'd throw them away," she continued. "Burn them. But I didn't. I kept them all, because a part of me still wanted to believe you meant it." "I do," he said, stepping closer again. "More than anything." She looked up at him, eyes shimmering with conflict. "I'm not the same woman you married," she said. "That version of me died the night I found out the truth." Daniel nodded. "Then let me love the woman you've become." Tears slipped down her cheeks. She didn't wipe them. "I don't know if I can trust you again." "I'll earn it," he promised. "One day at a time, one truth at a time." She stood silent for a moment longer. Then finally, slowly, she placed the letter back in his hand. "I'm not ready to come back," she said, "but I'm ready to talk." He nodded, his chest rising with quiet hope. "That's all I'm asking for." They left the bookstore together, walking through the falling snow like strangers, learning each other all over again. No hand-holding, no kisses. Just two souls with shattered pasts, and a spark that refused to die. Back at her small apartment, Olivia sat alone, replaying the conversation in her mind. Part of her wanted to shut the door again, lock her heart, and walk away forever. But another part, the quiet, trembling part, still remembered how it felt when he looked at her like she was the only person in the world. And that part whispered something she hadn't dared think in weeks. Maybe love doesn't always start right, but maybe it can still end right. The days that followed weren't magical. They weren't filled with laughter or sudden forgiveness. They were quiet. Daniel didn't try to overwhelm Olivia with grand gestures. There were no roses, no speeches, no expensive surprises. Instead, he showed up. Every day. Sometimes he brought coffee and left it at her doorstep. Sometimes he texted her a joke or a memory from their time together. And sometimes he simply asked, "How are you today?" Most days, she didn't reply. But she read every message, watched every sunrise with the coffee he left, and kept every note he scribbled on the napkin under her cup. She wasn't ready to open her heart, but it had stopped bleeding. One morning, as the snow began to melt and the first hint of spring whispered through the trees, Olivia sent a message back. "Meet me at the pier, 5 p.m. Daniel stared at the screen like it was written in gold. At 5 p.m. sharp, he stood at the edge of the wooden dock, the water below shimmering in the late sun. The air was crisp, and his hands shook not from the cold, but from the weight of what this moment could mean. Olivia arrived 5 minutes later, wearing a long coat and a guarded look. "I almost didn't come," she said. "I wouldn't have blamed you if you hadn't," he replied. They stood in silence, side by side, watching the waves lap against the dock. Then she spoke. "I've been thinking about everything. About how I ended up in that cafe. About the way you looked at me that first night." Daniel didn't interrupt. "I hated that I trusted you," she continued, "and then I hated myself even more for missing you." Her voice cracked, but she pressed on. "I keep wondering, was any of it real, or was I just convenient? A target that didn't know any better?" Daniel turned to her, his voice calm but raw. "It was real. Every laugh, every late-night conversation, every second I spent with you. I didn't know it at the time, but I was falling in love with you. And by the time I realized it, I was already too far gone." Olivia looked away. "I'm scared," she admitted. "Scared that if I let you back in, I'll lose myself again." He reached out, slowly, gently, his hand hovering inches from hers. "Then don't let me in all at once," he said softly. "Open the door an inch. Let me prove to you, earn you one moment at a time." She didn't take his hand. But she didn't pull away either. They walked together down the pier, speaking in fragments, not of love or betrayal, but of small things, music they missed, books they'd read, the weather. It wasn't romance. It was rebuilding. Over the next few weeks, they met more often. Sometimes they argued, sometimes they laughed. And one night, Olivia invited him in for dinner. Nothing fancy, just pasta and red wine. But for Daniel, it was more than a meal. It was a door, creaking open. Halfway through dinner, she pulled something from a drawer and slid it across the table. It was the stack of letters he'd written her. "I read them all," she said. "Some twice." He nodded, unsure what to say. "They hurt," she continued, "but they also helped, because they weren't perfect. They were messy, honest." Daniel looked at her, his voice low. "I am messy, Olivia. I don't know how to love like a fairy tale, but I know how to fight for something real, and I want to fight for you." For the first time in weeks, she reached for his hand. This time, she didn't pull back. "You're not forgiven," she said. "I don't expect to be," he replied. "But I'm not walking away either," she added. That night, they sat on the couch, no longer separated by anger, but not yet reunited by love, somewhere in between, a fragile truce born from pain and the beginning of hope. Later, as Daniel walked home alone, the city lights blurred around him, but his path felt clearer than ever. This wasn't the end of their story. It was the beginning of the chapter that mattered most, the one where love isn't promised but earned. It had been 3 months since Olivia had let Daniel back into her life slowly, with cautious steps. Their connection was different now. Deeper, stronger, more honest. But honesty came with a price. There were still shadows between them, ghosts from Daniel's past and wounds Olivia hadn't yet dared to expose. One evening, as the rain tapped softly against the windows of her apartment, Olivia stood by the fireplace, arms crossed, heart heavy. "I want to ask you something," she said, her voice barely louder than the crackling fire. Daniel, sitting on the couch, looked up. "Anything." "That night, the bet. I want to know everything. No filters, no softened truths." He nodded slowly, understanding that this was a turning point. So he told her. He told her about the poker game, the drunken laughter, the smug faces of his so-called friends daring him to do something outrageous. He explained how, in that moment, his ego had been bigger than his conscience, how he had chosen the most vulnerable person in the room not to hurt her, but to prove something to people who didn't matter. He told her about how the bet was supposed to last a week. But then she smiled at him for the first time, and everything changed. He talked about the guilt, the late-night guilt that ate away at him as he fell in love for real. How he'd tried to tell her, but couldn't find the words. How he'd sabotaged himself, thinking he didn't deserve her. By the time he finished, Olivia's eyes were full of tears. But not just from pain, from clarity. "Do you still speak to any of them?" she asked, her voice steady. "No," Daniel replied. "I cut them out, all of them, the night you left." She nodded and walked to the table, picking up a small wooden box. She opened it and pulled out a worn envelope. "My turn," she said. Daniel frowned, confused. "These are medical bills," she continued. "From 3 years ago, my mother got sick. We lost everything trying to save her. And when she died, I gave up on people, on hope." Daniel listened, stunned. She had never shared this part of her life. "I worked 2 jobs, slept on friends' couches, and stopped believing that anything good would last. That's why it was so easy for me to believe the worst in you when the truth came out." She folded the bills back into the envelope and looked at him. "We're both broken, Daniel, but maybe we can heal together." He stood up, walking slowly toward her. "I don't want to fix you," he said. "I just want to love you exactly as you are." For the first time, she believed it. That night, as the rain fell harder outside, they sat on the floor, wrapped in a blanket, speaking not as lovers, but as survivors. They shared every scar, every failure, every fear. No more hiding, no more pretending. Days passed, and a new rhythm formed. They laughed more, cooked together, walked through the city like it was their first time seeing it. But love, no matter how true, is always tested. And theirs would face its greatest trial soon. It started with a phone call. Daniel had applied quietly, without telling Olivia, for a grant to start a nonprofit to help women in crisis. Inspired by her story, by their story, he got it. It was a huge opportunity, national funding, full support, a dream. But it came with a condition. He'd need to relocate across the country. For a year. When he told Olivia, her face fell. "You're leaving?" she asked, her voice trembling. "I don't want to," he said, "but I feel like this is something I need to do." She didn't argue, didn't plead. She just nodded and said, "Then go. Do it." He looked at her, confused. "That's it?" She walked to the window, rain falling outside once more. "If you stay for me, you'll resent me one day," she said. "And if I beg you to stay, I'll resent myself." He walked over, cupping her face in his hands. "I don't want to lose you." She smiled, eyes shining. "You won't." They agreed to make it work. Distance, time zones, loneliness, but also letters, phone calls, late-night video chats. Love, real love, the kind worth fighting for. As Daniel packed his bags, Olivia slipped something into his suitcase. Later, when he arrived at his new apartment and opened it, he found a notebook. On the first page was a message in her handwriting. "This is for the next chapter. Write it with love. I'll be waiting to read every word." And he would. Because this wasn't goodbye. It was just another part of the story. The days after Daniel's departure were hollow. Olivia found herself reaching for her phone at random moments, just to see his name light up the screen. Even when he wasn't there, it felt like a piece of him lingered in her apartment, in the blanket on the couch, in the coffee mugs, in the smell of his cologne faintly left on her pillows. But this wasn't a story about separation. It was a story about growing separately to love stronger together. Daniel dove into his new life with purpose. The nonprofit was more demanding than he had imagined. Every day, he was surrounded by stories of pain, resilience, and survival. And with every woman he helped, he thought of Olivia, of the weight she had once carried alone. He spoke at shelters, organized support groups, built networks. He wasn't just changing lives, she was honoring hers. They talked every night, no matter how late or how tired. Their video calls were filled with updates, laughter, and silent moments where just seeing each other was enough. One night, after a particularly emotional day, Olivia looked into the screen and asked, "Are you okay?" Daniel nodded but hesitated. "I met someone today," he said quietly. "A woman. Her story reminded me of you. She'd lost everything, but she still smiled like the world couldn't touch her." Olivia smiled gently. "You don't have to protect me from your day. I want to know everything, the hard parts too." He exhaled in relief. "Sometimes I feel like I'm doing this to fix the parts of me that hurt you." "You don't owe me that," she said. "But I'm proud of you for who you're becoming." There was silence, but it was filled with connection. They had come so far. Still, the distance wasn't easy. There were nights when Olivia cried quietly, missing his warmth. When the ache in her chest felt unbearable. When she wondered if loving someone from afar was truly sustainable. And Daniel had his moments too. Seeing couples walk hand in hand, watching strangers laugh together in cafes, missed her, desperately. But they held on. Because what they had wasn't built on comfort. It was built on truth. One weekend, Daniel surprised her with a ticket. "I need you here, just for a few days." Olivia packed quickly, nerves fluttering in her chest as the plane took off. When she landed, Daniel was waiting with flower sheep ones, the kind he knew she liked. She dropped her bag and ran into his arms. The world disappeared. For 3 days, they lived as if time had no hold on them. They walked the streets of the new city, visited shelters, met some of the women Daniel had helped. Olivia saw firsthand the impact he was making. "You're doing something beautiful," she told him one evening, as they lay together watching the city lights outside his window. "I'm doing it for us," he whispered back. But as quickly as she arrived, it was time to leave again. At the airport, he kissed her forehead. "We're almost there, just a little longer." "I'll wait," she promised. As long as it takes. Back home, Olivia channeled her energy into something new, a book. She started writing her story piece by piece, not just the pain, but the healing, the love, the unexpected turns that led her to Daniel. Her words became a mirror, reflecting how far she'd come. Daniel, too, began journaling, not for the public, but for himself, for Olivia. Every page was a window into his soul that had once been too guarded to share. Their relationship became a bridge between two cities, two lives, two hearts growing together, yet apart. And then came the day. Daniel called her with a different tone in his voice. "I have news," he said. "The program is complete. My work here, it's done." Her heart skipped. "What does that mean?" "It means I'm coming home." He didn't wait. He booked a flight that same night. When he stepped off the plane, Olivia was there wearing the same red scarf she'd worn the day they met. He smiled, and the world tilted back into place. They didn't rush. They had learned patience. They moved in together not because they had to, but because they wanted to rebuild something new. Not just a relationship, but a shared life with room for both their dreams. One evening, as they sat on the balcony, Daniel pulled out a notebook, the same one she had given him. He handed it to her. "Open it." Inside were pages filled with his memories, thoughts, fears, and love letters. On the last page, there was only one sentence. "Will you marry me?" Olivia gasped, looking up. Daniel held out a simple ring knot, flashy, not expensive, but meaningful. "I don't want to rewrite the past. I just want to write the rest of our story with you." Tears streamed down her cheeks as she whispered, "Yes." Not because she needed saving, not because he owed her anything, but because they had fought for this love, built it from broken pieces, and now, finally, they were whole. The wedding was unlike anything anyone expected. No fancy cathedral, no hundreds of guests, no gold-lined invitations. Instead, it was held in the courtyard of a small art gallery downtown where Olivia had once had her first exhibit, back when no one believed in her work. There were no mirrors at the venue. Not because Olivia was ashamed of her body anymore, but because she didn't need validation from a reflection. Her confidence no longer came from the outside in. It bloomed inside her like wildfire. Daniel wore a navy suit, not designer, not tailored, but it fit him perfectly, like everything in this chapter of his life now did. And Olivia, she wore white, but it wasn't the dress people expected. It was soft, flowing, made by hand by a woman she had met during her therapy sessions. A woman who used to believe she had no purpose until Olivia encouraged her to sow again. Their wedding was filled with second chances. Stephanie was there, of course. So were many women from Daniel's nonprofit and men and women from Olivia's art classes. No one famous, no influencers, just real people with real hearts. As Olivia walked down the aisle, there were no gasps of surprise at her size, no whispered judgments about how she looked in her dress. There was only stillness and awe. Because when she walked, she didn't float, she owned the ground beneath her feet. Daniel's eyes filled with tears. Not because of her appearance, but because of what she had overcome. Because this wasn't just a wedding, it was a homecoming. Two souls finally resting where they were always meant to be. The vows were not scripted. Olivia spoke first. "I once believed love was something I had to earn, something I needed to become smaller to deserve. I thought I had to disappear to be chosen. But then you showed me that love doesn't demand I shrink. It invites me to expand." She paused, voice trembling. "You didn't fix me. You reminded me I was never broken." Gasps could be heard through the small crowd, not out of shock but resonance. Then Daniel took her hand, his voice thick with emotion. "I used to believe I could control everything. That love was a transaction, give and take. But then I met you, and you taught me that love is not a formula. It's a fire that reshapes everything it touches." He looked into her eyes deeply. "You are not my prize. You are my mirror, my match, my miracle, and I vow to protect your light, not dim it." They exchanged ring silver bands etched with the words, "We begin here." When the officiant declared them husband and wife, the kiss was not dramatic, not long. It was true, the kind of kiss that didn't need applause. After the ceremony, instead of a traditional reception, they hosted an open mic. People were invited to share their stories of pain, hope, and healing. Tears were shed. Laughter echoed through the gallery walls. And one thing became clear. This wasn't just a union of two people. It was a celebration of all the parts of them that had once been told they weren't enough. At one point during the night, Olivia stood alone by the dessert table, watching Daniel speak with a group of guests. He was laughing, head tilted back in joy. That's when Stephanie walked up beside her. "You know," Stephanie said softly, "the first time I met Daniel, he was so hard, cold, calculated. I never thought I'd see this version of him." Olivia smiled gently. "He just needed someone to believe there was more to him." "And you?" Olivia looked out at the night sky. "I needed to believe there was more to me." They stood in silence, side by side, no words necessary. Later that evening, Daniel found her in the gallery's back room, standing in front of a painting she had created but never displayed. It was abstract colors, swirling, colliding, blooming. "This is beautiful," he whispered. "I painted it during the worst time of my life," she admitted. "I didn't know what I was painting. I just needed to survive that moment." He put his arms around her from behind. "And now? Now I paint because I'm alive." They stood there together, surrounded by colors that once meant chaos but now symbolized healing. Before the night ended, Olivia made a small speech. "I know I don't fit into the fairy tales we grew up hearing. I'm not the princess who needed saving, nor the one whose beauty changed the world. But I found something even better. I found truth. And truth is that love isn't about how we look in pictures or how perfectly we dance in front of others. It's about who still holds your hand when the music stops." And as the guests stood in applause, Daniel took her hand once more. Together, they walked out into the night not as a fantasy, not as a bet won or a story rewritten, but as a love story that defied every expectation and became something real. Weeks passed, then months. Life, as it always does, settled into something new. But this time, it wasn't dull or predictable, it was real. Olivia and Daniel didn't live in a mansion. They didn't vacation on yachts. They didn't post curated love stories on social media. Instead, they built a life that felt like them. Mornings started with coffee in mismatched mugs. Afternoons were filled with Olivia's painting sessions and Daniel's growing involvement in the foundation they created, together supporting women who had been abandoned, judged, or silenced. They turned their pain into purpose. But one evening, as autumn leaves scattered across the porch, Olivia sat quietly, a letter trembling in her hands. It was from her estranged father. She hadn't spoken to him in over a decade since he said she would never find love unless she lost weight. His words had haunted her for years, shaping her self-worth in ways she was only now beginning to unravel. Daniel found her like that, silent, frozen. He knelt beside her, gently taking the letter. "Do you want to talk about it?" She shook her head, then nodded, then exhaled, like she had been holding her breath for years. "He apologized," she said, barely above a whisper. "Said he was wrong. That watching our wedding online made him realize what he missed." Daniel didn't respond with cliches. He didn't say, "You should forgive him." He simply held her, letting her decide what healing looked like. Because healing, they had learned, wasn't a straight line. It was a spiral. A few days later, Olivia wrote her own letter. Not to him, not yet. But to the version of herself who once cried in fitting rooms, who starved herself for approval, who believed love was something you had to earn. "Dear me," she wrote, "you were never the problem." And with each word, she reclaimed her power. Meanwhile, Daniel faced his own reckoning. One afternoon, while clearing out his old apartment storage unit, he found the journal. The one where he had written the bad. "Date her for 60 days. Make her fall for you. Prove it's possible." The words were like a punch to the stomach. He almost threw it in the trash. But instead, he brought it home. He handed it to Olivia. "I want you to see this," he said, his voice strained. Because if we're going to move forward with nothing hidden, you need to know everything. Olivia opened it slowly, each page cutting deeper than the last. She read every word, every single word. When she finished, she closed the journal. Her eyes were glassy, but her voice didn't shake. I already knew, she said quietly. Daniel froze. You? What? I've always known there was something, she whispered. No one falls that fast unless they're chasing a prize. But I chose to believe the man you became mattered more than the man you were. Daniel collapsed into the chair across from her, stunned. He had expected rage. He had braced for the end. But instead, she stayed. Not because she was weak, but because she was stronger than the betrayal. And that's what love is, sometimes. Not perfection, not fairy tales, but truth, messy and raw and painful, and the choice to stay when every part of you could walk away. Years passed. They adopted a dog. They opened a gallery space that doubled as a healing center. They hosted free art classes for survivors. Daniel gave talks about ego, masculinity, and starting over. And Olivia? She painted something that went viral. A faceless woman surrounded by mirrors, all shattered but from inside the glass. The painting was titled, "The Reflection Was Never the Enemy." It was sold to a museum, but Olivia kept a replica in their home. Not to remember her pain, but to honor her survival. One evening, as they sat on their porch under a sky full of stars, Olivia asked, "Do you think it would have worked if we met under different circumstances?" Daniel thought for a moment. "No," he said, "because I needed to lose the bet to win something real." She laughed. "So you're saying I'm the prize?" He grinned. "Number, I'm saying you were the lesson, and I'm still learning." And as the night wrapped them in its quiet embrace, they didn't need fireworks or grand gestures. They had each other, not for show, not for status, but because two broken people had chosen, again and again, to rebuild each other not into who the world wanted them to be, but into who they were always meant to become. Together, forever.